Tsunamis, earthquakes, floods, and even volcanoes killed more than 250,000 people in 2010. This made it the second worst year for natural disasters worldwide since 1983. The Pacific region is commonly known as the Ring of Fire. This ring is a 25,000-mile horseshoe shape that is associated with a nearly continuous series of oceanic trenches, volcanic arcs, and tectonic plate movements. About 90% of the world's earthquakes occur along the Ring of Fire.
Disaster happens everywhere, and we are in a disaster-prone area, and our affected nation cannot alone fight against the disaster or aftermath of the disaster. So we need other forces, other nations to help.
During these disasters, many countries come together to provide humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. As these nations participate in the emergency response, communications is the key to effectively delivering the much-needed aid.
One of the biggest issues we have when responding to past disasters, we know, is the ability to effectively communicate among the multitude of organizations who arrive on the scene shortly after the event.
What typically occurs in a disaster, people show up. People just show up with whatever they have, and there's no coordination of communications capability, and that therefore impacts command and control. So things like foods that may be delivered at an airport aren't distributed properly. Security isn't provided in the right places to do the right kinds of things. People aren't evacuated the right kinds of ways. So communications is really the key to emergency response.
So every time there's a natural disaster of large scale, we have to depend on our neighbors. And the communication equipments which they will carry in and the communication equipments which we have, we must see whether they are interoperable.
U.S. Pacific Command has joined together with 21 countries in the Pacific region to test and document communication systems that would be used during a humanitarian relief effort. These countries get together each year during an exercise called Pacific Endeavor. The Changi Command and Control Center in Singapore hosted this year's event.
Any large-scale HADR operation would require the combined effort of many nations and military. And we thought that as a responsible member of the international community, Singapore and in particular Singapore Armed Forces, are looking ways to meaningfully contribute to this important effort. And we work together with the international community and also the regional partners in preparation for any of the HADR.
We should know what radios, what data capabilities, what devices other nations are going to bring into a theater when something happens. And we should have a document that tells us whether our devices will work with their devices.
Pacific Endeavor is a combination of exercise and a discussion forum for representatives from the nations of the Pacific Rim. The primary purpose is for everyone to come together and coordinate communications interoperability. Secondly, it allows nations to interact and learn about one another's cultures and forge lasting relationships.
One of the really exciting parts about coming out here is getting to meet with our counterparts from across the Asia-Pacific region, build solid friendships that will survive certainly the first contact of an international crisis, make friends that we can turn to and realize the capabilities that our other nations bring to bear.
The biggest hurdles to overcome is understanding each other. A lot of people have a lot of different ways to do their business, and one of the things you appreciate here is it's not right or wrong, it's just different. And often different approaches can give a different perspective on things and find new ways to do your business. Here, I mean, it's 22 nations, obviously a lot of relationship building, getting to appreciate a lot of other people's customs and traditions. So I think it's a fantastic part of the program and very important for any sort of future HADR operations that we do.
Ultimately, the key is to not only interoperate with other nations, but also with the international humanitarian community, so when the militaries hit the ground in an HADR situation, there will be an even better outcome.
Communications interoperability is the core of this, but it goes beyond that. We've, as I mentioned, worked this year with representatives from the international humanitarian community to promote interoperability not just between militaries, but between militaries and the non-governmental organizations and governmental organizations that would be responding to an international crisis. It promotes, again, not only the technological connectivity, but the cultural connectivity between governments, militaries, and the international humanitarian community.
We in the military, we're a very military-centric mindset, and we think we have all of the resources and all the capability, but the fact of the matter is the elements of the international humanitarian community are on the ground much faster and much more effectively than we are, simply because our organizations are larger and they take longer to spin up.
We all have our own capabilities and our own ability to support other people in times of need. NGOs definitely have a lot of capabilities that we don't, and I mean, together, if we work together, ultimately will produce a much better effect than we otherwise would.
With the NGOs and the militaries working together, they can draw from each other's experiences and adapt to ever-changing technologies.
I think of it more like the military collaborating with public and civic activities to address these humanitarian needs. And what's happening is citizens are increasingly empowered by mobile phones. You think about 77% of the world's population now has a mobile phone, either a feature phone or a smartphone. And that means they can collect information, send pictures, SMS, Twitter, Facebook, and this is a whole new source of information that I think the military has to tap into and incorporate in its planning and in its response.
Each year, the program continues to expand. This year, Pacific Endeavor added Cyber and Phoenix Endeavors.
Phoenix Endeavor focuses on spectrum. So we go through and provide some initial baseline information on spectrum management and planning in a disaster. Cyber also takes that same approach, but in the area of information assurance network defense. For Cyber Endeavor, we've linked up and partnered with both industry, the academic community, as well as the military to come together and offer some information sharing courses on basic fundamentals of information management in a disaster.
When you have a humanitarian relief disaster, what happens is everybody's coming to the aid of that country. And because everybody's coming to the aid of the country with all these emitters, the radios, the radars, the walkie-talkies, you need to deconflict the spectrum so that everybody is not bumping heads with each other and everybody's on a different frequency and not on the same frequency in order to get the food, the medicine, and the blankets.
This is Uniform Sierra. Radio check, over.
This year, there was a heavy focus on equipment testing. Next year, the countries will come together in a tabletop exercise, apply those systems, and validate the information and procedures developed the previous year.
Pacific Endeavor 11 outstripped all of the goals previously set and really moved the bar forward for next year. But we're not going to rest on our laurels. Next year, I hope to invite and have participation from more members of the international humanitarian community, more participation, additional participation from academia. I'd like to see more partner militaries participate as well.
The mission doesn't stop at the end of the 2 weeks. All the representatives of each country have a job to do when they get home.
We're, however, just a small slice of our representative militaries. We need to make sure, each of us needs to make sure that we go back to our host nations and spread the word with those elements that would be deploying in the case of a natural disaster and humanitarian assistance or disaster response scenario. Make sure that those folks have access to the information that we've developed out here during Pacific Endeavor.
Each participant will hopefully take away more than just communications knowledge, but also a sense of pride in what has been accomplished here.
I think many people who are outside the military simply view the military as warfighters and don't appreciate what the military does in terms of humanitarian assistance around the world.
The end result, the most critical item, is to save lives. If we can come together as a partnership, document and assess systems at which we could work together in a disaster, know which systems will work, in the time of event we have to put them on the ground. We believe the communication structure that would support that disaster response, which will in turn save lives.
I think that this is our opportunity to do a good thing. We are all personally looking for a way to make a difference in the world, make the world a better place, so that when we look back on our lives, we think we did something and accomplished something. I'm pretty convinced that when I look back on this, for the 3 years I was in this program, I was able to contribute a little bit toward making the world a better place.